Welcome to the Life of Tashmia. I'm Tash. Today in the podcast, we're going to be interviewing the amazing Demelza, another professional dominatrix. We talk all things how she became a dominatrix, her journey, what her personal life versus her professional life is like. We talk about submissive men and why it's still taboo in society, and why every female has a little bit of dom inside of them. So please welcome my guest, dominatrix Demelza.
Oh, amazing. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this chat.
Thanks for coming on the podcast today. It's really nice to have you. We've known each other, I think, about a year now or so, and it's been great getting to know you, and I'm so happy that my listeners can get to know a bit more about you too and another fellow dominatrix. So I just wanted to first get people to understand like a bit of background as to who you are and what kind of made you want to become a dominatrix.
Okay, so I've been a pro dom for just about 2 years now, and in terms of what made me want to do it, it's kind of hard to identify. It was always in my head as something I wanted to do, but it took me a really long time to actually just do it. So the sort of impetus was moving cities. I moved here for a different job that I have, and I kind of just got the guts to go, okay. Yeah, pretty much.
So you don't know where that kind of like voice, because like I was introduced it through a friend, and if I'd kind of known about it through her, I don't think I would have been like called to it. So it's interesting, like no one actually mentioned it or anything.
No, I was sort of strangely researching public sort of dom houses in the city that I lived. I'd definitely done that kind of play with partners, and funnily enough, one of my exes had given me a How to Be a Mistress book, which I still have, as a gift, which was really quite sweet. And it's the kind of book that will talk about sort of different mistress styles, and I remember there's like this Amazonian mistress in there, and I was like, oh, that's me. But then I was still not quite owning it. So really it was being in a different set of circumstances, different city, new environment, and just realizing I had to follow through on the desire.
And maybe with a move, you kind of feel you can like reinvent yourself a little bit more, and you're not so confined by what are people like people's perceptions or things like that.
Yeah, 100%.
So do you think there's anything in your past that kind of made you be like more of a dominant woman, or?
I don't know. I think it's always been there. So I'm actually quite protective, I think. And I always noticed that when it came to my friends, in particular my female friends, I was sort of always taking charge and being protective. And yeah, it's even weird. Like when I would go out clubbing or something like that, I was always like very confident, very assertive. And if I was dancing with someone like a man, for instance, I would often take control. And yeah, I can't really identify a thing. It's just sort of always been there and simmering away. And I was sort of always rejecting it a little bit. So yeah, it's hard to pin down.
Yeah. Interesting. So what do you think has been the most surprising thing you found out when you made that transition from kind of like, let's say, vanilla life to like professional dom?
How awesome it is. Like I didn't have really any preconceptions because I didn't know any pro doms. I didn't know anything about this side of the sex industry, and it is, part of the sex industry. Like I hadn't done any of that kind of thing before either. I was sort of really green. And I'd say the biggest surprise is meeting just amazing people. So meeting particularly other doms such as yourself and just learning about them and their different styles and how they came to it. And I haven't yet met someone that isn't interesting and brilliant sort of in their own way. So it's just been this crazy sort of expansion of like my life. And I just didn't expect that, like who expects that? So yeah, it's definitely been the right choice.
It is a nice community, like, to get into. And as you said, like meeting other pro doms or just meeting like other people in the kink scene, I think it's like not just eye-opening, but it's also quite inviting. I find it's quite an inviting scene. I mean, I hate saying blanket statements for scenes because obviously you have your bad area of every scene, but I think it is one that you know, you open up to people and they will definitely open up to you as well. Have you found like that's your experience?
Yeah, it's a very inviting space. And the one thing I love about, I suppose, kink in general is that it is very affirming to everyone. So everyone sort of has their place.
Yeah.
It's a conscious community in terms of not being body shaming or shaming in general, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of about acceptance there. But as you say, you know, there's negative parts of that.
Yeah.
I've met one or two people through the industry that I would, you know, don't like that much, but that's fine, right? Like it's not all perfect. Yeah. It can't be. Yeah. But it's like any negative experience has been far outweighed by
the positive ones. Yeah, definitely. Said, hey, I'm gonna like try this new side of me. Where did it start for you?
Oh, well, it started at Sydney's only sort of public dungeon. Yeah. I think we all know what that is. Yeah. I literally just walked in, as you do. Someone else gave me a pair of latex undies because I had nothing. I had like, this is my French lace bra, and these are my heels, and I didn't know what else to wear because I just, you know. So I just arrived, and basically Demelza arrived pretty much that day as well, because essentially it was a training session with a submissive. Yeah. And I was very nervous for the first few minutes, and then as soon as I sort of had the submissive to myself after watching another dom basically play with them and do a bit of a scene, I kind of just went for it, and it all sort of clicked. I felt very calm and very safe and like, oh, this is what's yeah.
It's funny because I always say that's what happened with me. Like before my first scene, I was really like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, is this me? And then I say like that first night, even though like I knew fuck all really, I like when we walked out to get the sub, this persona just came over me, and I would have always said like that's when Tash was born. Like that's when Mistress Tash was born that night. Like you can put it down to a second. It wasn't like after all the months of training or like developing myself as a dom. I'm like, no, that's the night. It just like it came on, and it's so interesting how it just like comes on, and you step into it and you like feel empowered by it.
It's it's almost like magic. Like and I sort of similar to the way I've heard you describe it. I still wasn't 100% sure. Like, is that there? Yeah. It just happens. Yeah. And it's not about the training or whatever experience you've had. I think it's just about having that submissive in front of you, and then you act.
And I think it's also the energy. I think if you're someone who can pick up on people's energies, and it kind of unlocks something inside of you. Do you know what I mean? That you can play off the energy, you're playing off your energy, and you just go. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's the sort of dominant submissive energy is something to talk about, because I feel like as doms we get a lot of press, and that's great, and so we should. But you know, the sub is, especially in that first time, giving you the permission, giving you that energy. Yeah. And you can't be the dom without them also being the sub. So it's just this wonderful energy exchange.
Yeah. It's like I always think of it like a dance, an energy power dance. So how did you find your style? Like, what would you describe as your style?
It took a little while. So at first it was about kind of just getting a handle on the dynamic and flow of a scene. But my style came in maybe like 3 or 4 months. I think it started to emerge. I'd say I can be quite aggressive. I can be quite physically dominant. So I'm very strong. I've been powerlifting for 4 years. Previous to that, I've done martial arts or swimming or something. So I enjoy, I enjoy that sort of passionate, physical, dominant side, but I can also be incredibly sweet and protective and just generally quite sadistic. So if I'd say there's something unique about my style, it might come down to like a very primal kind of physicality. I like it when sessions get a little wild, basically. Yeah.
Throw them down.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
Yeah. When you were training to be a dom, what did you think was the most difficult thing? Like, what did you find in the first few months when you're finding your style? Like, what was the biggest struggle you had?
Well, part of it's technical skills. So at the start, I was very intimidated by rope. but I've gotten a lot better at that, thankfully. But at the start, you're just a little overwhelmed because there's so many things that you need to learn. And even when it came down to spanking, like right now, there's just like a range of things I can do with my hand before I even pick up and implement. But that was a learning journey as well. I think the most difficult thing was to realize that you can plan a session, but then what happens in the session doesn't go according to plan, and that's fine. So for me, a good session is when I'm in a nice flow state and I will have planned. But at the start, I sort of thought, if I haven't done what's on the plan, then have I screwed up? And I've sort of come to realize that, you shouldn't be overthinking these things, and you can get in your own way if you think that way.
I think, like, as you said, if you have a plan, you're like, okay, I've got A, B, C, D to get through, but you might find that you get stuck on B because you and your sub are in this amazing space, and it's like, okay, and it's accepting that this is where the session's meant to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you didn't think that, and then you had all these other ideas. But, so one of the most wonderful early sessions I did was CBT and a lot of spanking. But the spanking, there was something about the energy where he just in subspace was just floating. So we didn't do much else. Yeah. And I'd sort of like planned lots of other things. And I thought, how did we spend like an hour and a half on that? But we just did.
Because you get into the flow. They're in their subspace and it just works. Yeah. And I think, it's about not having expectations of a scene, right? It's like, okay, like, as I said, you got to get through all these things, but it's like, or it's got to get to a certain level, or I've got to like get this kind of response, but it's like almost just surrendering to the scene at some point. It's like, okay, this is where we are today. This is where we're at.
Yeah, it's a really good way to think about it, that you also need to surrender
to the scene, yeah. So you've worked at the dungeon for a few months now, like in your journey and everything. What was kind of the point where you were like, I feel comfortable? Was it once you learned all the tools and like that's where you felt, I feel a bit more comfortable with this, I feel a bit more safe?
It's kind of strange. I felt very comfortable as a dom, like, yes, I'm meant to be doing this, like, from that first moment. So I'm typically not nervous before scenes, which was actually a really nice difference to my sort of my career, which I think I tend to, I have to be on, but in a different sense. And I tend to be nervous about that, overthink that. But I found with my dom activities and sessions that I actually, it's something that I genuinely feel very centered and comfortable in. In terms though, like, to start with, it was difficult because in that environment, someone would walk in and you would talk to them for 5-10 minutes and then that would be that. That took a while to get used to because everyone's got a different style. I wasn't very comfortable with that. Like when I walk out to talk to a potential submissive I'm about to session with, I'm not actually flirty. I'm not.
I would say I'm like neutral.
Yeah, I'm very pleasant.
I'm not in dom mode. Like I'm not in my scene dom, but I'm not like overly friendly. I'm just like, I'm very neutral.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of know what it is that they are after, what kind of experience they want. I'm getting a gauge of that person. I want to make them feel somewhat comfortable as well. And then also set up expectations and limits. And then I'll switch on. But I don't sort of switch on like, there's no like Demelza sort of
switch.
No. Like, and I felt weird about that at the start because I think I saw other doms doing it very differently. And I was like, I don't know how to flirt with people. You tell me.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like, I guess that pre-scene is, to me, it's so important. And when I've trained doms, that's something they're actually more nervous about than the actual scene. Like, I don't know what to do, like when they come in and all the things I've got to ask and check. And I'm like, just relax. Like you've kind of got a checklist that you've got to go through, consent, safety things, boundaries, limits. Like it's a checklist. And if you have a checklist with you, use your checklist. Like, but people get like, how am I meant to act? Like, I think it's almost more intimidating than the actual scene.
Yeah. I don't know why. It is strange, but because I think maybe the reason why we feel a little strange about it is that there's this expectation that we need to present. But it doesn't. To me, it doesn't really start until the scene starts.
Well, yeah, and then that's when the show starts, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to be quite normal up until that point. Yeah.
Interesting. So, When you've learned the tools of trade, you feel comfortable. How did you feel working at the Dom House?
Mixed. So, some of working there was an amazing education in the sense that I saw lots of clients in my time there. I had a variety of sessions from, foot fetish, GS, all those sorts of things.
Good exposure.
To good exposure to a lot of fetish and a lot of kink. And that was actually really great. So the variety was great. Establishing regular clients was great. But working at a place like that, you don't really have control over your own bookings.
Yeah.
I was always very, I suppose, forward in terms of advertising myself. And I would get frustrated by not being advertised or essentially not running my own business.
Well, you're not in control of your own, I guess, image and business. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's those sorts of things that after a certain amount of time, I feel like places like that are an amazing sort of way to start. There are many options when it comes to starting as a dom. I would sometimes get training from the mistresses there or go elsewhere for training. So I sort of did it bit by bit. Yeah. So it was basically on the job experience coupled with mentoring and training from other doms. But yeah, it has its drawbacks. I can just put it that way.
Yeah. How have you handled kind of the line between personal life and professional life?
So in terms of whether I've told people I'm a dominatrix, do you mean?
Yeah, whether you tell people, but also like your relationships or like especially your pre-existing ones. Like you weren't one before and then all of a sudden you're a dominatrix. Like how does that transition happen? Like what's the impact?
Well, usually I just send a really hot photo of me in latex or leather and then they go, wow, that's awesome. So yeah, if I tell friends, so there are certain people that I've definitely told in my sort of pre-existing established relationships, and then there are others I haven't. And sometimes it's just because I'm not sure they get it. Sometimes it's because I enjoy having, it's not a secret life, but it's also hero power. Yeah, but it's not a secret. There are so many people who know, but it's also something that I enjoy sort of having off to this, like, not to the side, because I do it every single day, but it's there and it's just this special part of me. So I think that when it comes to my partner, so I do have a partner, I'm incredibly lucky that he is just very supportive and secure. Yeah. Like you've met my partner and he turns up for my photo shoots and puts a collar on. And very nice. So I can say that in terms of my personal life, it really hasn't been difficult, except that obviously I am anonymous today because I'm not sort of out in my other professional life because unfortunately, I just don't think that would be very clever of me. Yeah. So that's been one thing to think about.
Was there anything you had to kind of implement in your relationship with your partner kind of to keep a boundary between like work and personal life? Like, or did it just roll on like seamlessly? Did you notice any changes?
No changes in our relationship. If anything, simply I was more mindful when I started to tell him, so he knows exactly what I do and don't do with clients. And that's pretty much, it's been communication has been the massive thing. So as long as our communication is good and it's strong, then there just hasn't been any issues because as a person, he has no issues with me whatsoever doing this work. So he doesn't think that sex work in general or this particular type of sex work is problematic. He's quite happy about it, if anything. But even then, that lovely disposition to begin with that marries up with mine is great, but you want to nurture that with good communication. So he's never sort of thinking, well, what is she doing, right? Yeah. So it's simply about, well, these are the boundaries I have as dominatrix and they work really well with my partner.
Yeah. And I think it's also, you got to have a lot of trust. Trust from I say like if your partner's constantly like questioning like what's happening in the session or is she keeping to the like boundaries we've set, I think you're going to drive yourself insane. But if you're someone in your relationship, there's a lot of trust, like I don't think it should be a problem.
It shouldn't be. And despite the fact that, you and I love being doms, we love our work, it is still a job. It is work. And so it's interesting in that, like, I wouldn't want to cross boundaries with any of my submissives, right? Because they're boundaries that I hold in my job. So it's sort of, it just makes sense. I can't describe it. If anything, it's been a good thing for the relationship because it's brought that wonderful community into our space. So it's sort of, if both parties are happy and one person happens to be involved in the sex industry, if anything, it just adds excitement to life. Yeah. Like, the funny thing is, I sat down before I eventually walked into the dungeon and I did, like, you know, those, like, set your goals, set your values. I was like, what are my core values? And I wrote my 3 core values out and I reflected on them and I reduced them all. And I was like, it's in line with my values. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just an extension of that. Yeah. And yeah, I think if it really is that way for you, then everything should be peachy, and it's just literally fun. He gets to do fun stuff now, so.
Exactly. But I also think people don't really realize that, you know, there's Demelza version of you and then there's your I go home version of me. And I think there is sometimes a misconception that what you see in a session is like what you're like 24 hours a day.
Oh God, no, I'm hopeless. Like, I need someone to take care of me. Like, you know, and I'm busy and I get stressed. Yeah. And, you know, my partner's laughed plenty of times when I'm posting on Instagram and he's like, you're lying in bed complaining you can't go to the toilet or something, you know, like, because of that curry you ate. Like, it's just, we're real people. Yeah. And our dom personas are part of us. But they're like a heightened part of us that we get to enjoy. Yeah. And then we switch it up.
And that's what I've always said is, like, I honestly believe that, like, every woman has this side of them in them. Like, what form it exists in is different. But I think, you know, with professional doms, we spend so much of our life in that space and in our headspace, that it's not likely that when we come home, we're going to want to stay in that headspace, because we're already spending way more than most people are going to spend in that headspace anyway, even if you are in the kink scene. When you're a professional, you're spending a lot more time there. And so I think it's really important that when we are in our personal lives, that we do have someone to take care of us, because we are taking care of people like all day long.
Yeah, like I really I think I saw one of your Instagram posts a little while ago about like what we do, and I think you were talking about how we just hold space and hold energy for people.
When people ask what I do, I'm like, I hold space for people. Like, that's what I do.
Yeah, so I get the lovely dom high after a session and during sessions. Not every time, but it does happen, which I love. But it's also there's a lot of supportive holding of space, and it's I find it very high intensity emotional work that we do. So yeah, when I get home, I'm definitely not like that. And if a client wants you know, out of session attention, then it'll be something we've negotiated, and it's a paid service. Yeah. And then I have to think carefully, do I have the energy for that? Yeah. For a phone call or these texts or something, like, because I can't just.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm not huge on the out of session stuff. It's really funny. Even my regular subs or clients, they text me like to book things in. I'm like, I sound really rude on text. It's just like, yes, this is when I'm free. It's just because it's like I switch into that mode, and I can't really go switching in and out. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm either in or I'm out. Like, I'm not going to like go in for 5 minutes while I text you and then step out for a second. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you might just be doing something else. Yeah. But whereas when it comes to our sessions, we're prepared.
Yeah, I've dropped into the space. I've dropped into Tash. I've like done my meditation. I've dropped into the energy I want to be in, and then I'm in my head. But like when I'm just like at the gym and someone's texting me like, "What's your schedule like this week?" I'm just like, "Here it is." I'm like, I sound really mean.
They probably love it.
Yeah, probably. So I know we've had some really interesting chats, and like you have such interesting like views about, you know, female desire, and we've talked about like the objectification of men and how it's so interesting in this space in particular. Like, can you tell me a bit more about like what your views are on that?
Well, I just think that it's strange because the experience of being a female dom in particular, right, with dominatrixes, and the way that the release that our clients get when it comes to sort of embracing their submission particularly when it comes to acts of objectification. So someone's being reduced to your slave, or literally to an object. And I sort of, when I do talk to my friends sort of outside the scene who know what I do, and they sort of, they don't get distressed, but they don't get it. And I find, so for me, I find like, what is BDSM? Yes, it's a power exchange. We're taking a particular role, but you know, the question of why someone can get pleasure through objectification, I think, is quite interesting. And I think for men in particular, it's for some men, not all people, of course, but it's something that's quite primal.
Yeah.
So being physically desired to the point that someone's going to break your boundaries. So of course, in a session, it's been pre-negotiated. Everything's done, planned, and through consent. But the notion of being sort of without one's will, not an agent in the world, but reduced just to a physical possession, it can look very humiliating. It can be incorporated into play that is meant to be humiliating. But I honestly think it's very affirming.
Yeah.
I think that it's sort of playing with the idea that, you know, we can negate these social parts of ourselves to affirm just us as the physical being, that you are worthy of that attention.
Yeah.
And no matter how nasty I'm being to you, it's paradoxical. I'm actually affirming you. You are getting, you know, the most sublime pleasure from that.
Yeah.
And it's through that you're getting this affirmation.
Yeah.
So imagine being, you know, so a lot of our subs, well, not a lot, but there've been quite a few that have held very powerful positions in their organizations, if not running them. And why do they need sometimes to have that stripped away?
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to sort of this wonderful sense of affirmation that, you might be a stupid so-and-so who's only fit to lick my boots, but you're special.
Yeah.
In that moment, all of my attention is yours.
I think you use a really interesting word, like the primalness of it. And especially if like, definitely, I've always said like there's such a range of subs out there. Not all of them are like powerful CEOs, but particularly like in your example, for someone who is in that position on a day-to-day life, the pressure and the, you know, constantly being in your head and having, you know, people demand things of you and stuff, to have that space where you are kind of stripped to that object is such a release. Do you know what I mean? It would be it's such a psychological release for them. And to get back to like, who are you? You weren't born a CEO, right? You became that. That's not who you primarily are. Like, let's strip that back. Let's see what's beneath it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Putting it that way, that you're not born that way. Yeah, it's a role that you're doing, that you've achieved and that you have to put on every single day. But at the heart of it, you're this little palpitating organism, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we live in a very cerebral age. There's social media, emails, internet. Like we're living in a very virtual world in many ways, and being stripped back to just a physical thing, you know, the notion of objectification can be, extremely pleasurable.
Yeah.
And I sort of look at BDSM very much through a play lens, and very much therefore through a bit of an art lens.
Yeah.
So I think there is the association of BDSM with trauma as well. So you can do really important trauma work through it. But I also feel like in many ways it's kind of like art, and through art is transformative, and art is associated to play in like human play in some sense. What we can do can sometimes be quite extreme, but I always feel like it's very playful and transformative.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, I know we're talking very like male focused. You know, I acknowledge I see couples, I see women, but, you know, I think I've always said like maybe 85% of my clients have always been like male. So I guess that's the bulk. But it's interesting because it's still so taboo, even though they make up the bulk. You know, it's still such a subject like that men would take on this submissive role.
I know. And it almost feels quite closeted in many ways. The sense that, a lot of them aren't out to their friends or find it difficult when they're dating. So it's an interesting phenomenon because, of course, it's reversing the social norm. And I don't really understand why it's that controversial. Like in a social historical context, I understand, of course, why it is a little controversial for men to take up this radically submissive role. But I just see it as such a fundamental human need. And if that just happens to be where you fall on the sort of erotic spectrum, then so be it. Like, enjoy it. But it is a taboo subject for sure.
I mean, a lot of my clients and subs I've had, I'm the only one that knows this side of them. And I sometimes find it really sad. Like, you can't reveal this. And I've also known in my personal life, submissive men who just can't live that life, that they've had to shut it off, and they can't even explore it anymore in their personal life because it gets too overwhelming. It's too hard to hide. It's just like there's this huge conflict like internally that they're having between the submissive side of me and what the expectation from society, my family, my job is of me. And so I've seen this happen a lot. Their solution is to shut down the submissive side. Like, that's how they think they're going to solve the problem. And I just think you can't live that way. You've just become unhappy. You're not living an authentic version of yourself.
Because it doesn't go away by trying to ignore it. So it's similar, like it was always bubbling in the background with me and it doesn't go away. And when you embrace parts of yourself like that, it really opens things up. So I think that's one reason why I really love the course that you put together, because I fully recognize that, you know, many women out there are not interested in being a dom, right? Or they're not interested in their intimate life being where they're 80% a dom, right? Or taking control. But I still think that it's a notion that maybe needs to be thought of a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think people don't actually understand, I think, what domination is. And that's one of the things I've always promoted is like, domination is not what you think. Like, stepping into your power, stepping into your dominance is not what you think of that woman who's screaming and swearing at everyone and calling people pieces of shit. Like, that's not what it is.
No,
it could be for some people, but like, it's actually taking control. It's actually feeling empowered. It's feeling confident. And we as women should be feeling that way in our play life, in our relationships. There's nothing wrong with us stepping into our dominance. It was taken away from us so long ago. We're finally in a very, like, you know, on the spectrum of like life, it's such a short blip that we've actually got it back. We need to step into it. And that doesn't mean that you're some hardcore cold bitch. It just means you're owning it.
Yeah, and it's just, it can be the smallest thing. So I had a really lovely couple come to me, and they were both a little bit submissive, but the woman really wanted to step more into her dominant role. And I was sort of trying to say that you might, at the end of the day, enjoy when he grabs you by the hair and, you know, does the thing. But you might suddenly realize that you're also going to enjoy telling him to get on his knees and be a good boy and do something for you. Sometimes it's the outfit. I was like, try this corset on. You'd be amazed at what a corset does. You suddenly look a little bit more like a goddess. Like, it brings out that side of you. And to be quite frank, I'm quite used to now being worshipped every week. It feels amazing. I get sick or go on a holiday and I miss it.
It's funny when you take a step away and you do miss it.
It's actually, even if it's not sort of the core part of your sexuality, it is definitely something that is highly charged. It's erotic. And the experience of having a man pretty much genuinely worship you is beautiful. And I think that, maybe the image of the dom that you're trying to break down is basically the rather intimidating, scary woman in the leather, which I love to be. But it's not all that, you know. And even in my own practice, I love putting on lingerie and having nylon worship. It's a beautiful thing, putting on the most feminine clothes, the most beautiful nylons and heels, and just having a guy lose his mind. And doing that in a way that you're taking your power, you're in charge. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be at home in charge of everything. It can be just something that you learn to tap into.
And I think, like, as we were just saying, for submissive men, the reason why they enjoy it is because it's such a contrast maybe to their everyday life. It can be that same enjoyment for women. like even if they aren't feeling confident and empowered in their everyday life, that they can switch it, and then they can really enjoy it. Okay, this is the opposite, and I can step into this and really like take pleasure in actually that different role that I'm used to.
Absolutely. It's very feminine, like receiving that kind of attention. And the more you get comfortable with taking control, the more you realize, well, it's coming from this wonderful, because I'm a woman, not in spite of, I'm not taking up a role that's foreign to me somehow. It's just there.
Yeah. And I think also, like you mentioned, like the erotic. And I think people always think erotic sexual. Erotic energy doesn't have to mean sex. Like I draw upon erotic energy in so much of my sessions, which might not even be sessions that are around someone's sexual fetishes or anything like that. They might be coming to me for like getting out of their everyday life, getting their head into more of a meditative state, like whatever it is, embracing a different side of themselves for whatever reason. But I might draw upon my erotic energy to lead that session from. And it's very like, and that's what I mean. The erotic can be dominance in itself, and I think as women, we need to understand, like, we always used to look at like erotic objectification of women, and it's like, it doesn't have to be objectified. You can actually take control of it.
Absolutely. And likewise, sort of for the more submissive man sort of seeking that objectification, it's not literal.
Yeah.
Right? This is not on a social political scale. It's what's interesting about erotic energy and erotic relationships between people is that they do operate in a subversive way. So you have these wonderful permissions to do things to each other and for each other that, of course, are just radically inappropriate out there in your everyday persona. And it's very freeing.
Yeah.
So you can play with those types of energies and acts that seem, extremely taboo, and some of them really are.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the point.
Well, because you've created this like consensual, safe space to do it in. Do you know what I mean? And I think, and I've said this before, like vanilla world, I hate saying that, but it's just a way of saying, kink versus non-kink. We've been, as females, I'd say most of us have been in a situation, in our play lives, in our personal play lives, where there's no conversation prior. Do you know what I mean? Like things happen, someone yanks your hair, and I've said this before. I know experiences like someone spanks you, someone does this, like, and maybe you actually probably could have been cool with it, but you were never asked. And it takes all control and consent out of it, and it just turns it from being what could have been a really nice erotic experience into one of just like, I wasn't comfortable. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah. And maybe the precise moment of discomfort was because you were never asked.
Yeah.
Right? So as you said, like maybe the face slapping or the hair pulling could have been lovely.
Yeah.
In certain circumstances. But yeah, it's the sort of, no one's ever entitled. Right? So it's the entitlement that would make someone feel quite vulnerable and sometimes afraid, or like the consent has been violated, because you don't just get to take from people or just do things to people without asking. And that, again, that's the wonderful part of the sort of kink community and working as a pro-dom is that, we're all sort of elite when it comes to consent and negotiation and communication, and you just have to be. And it seems strange, when you compare to what might happen at a vanilla party, for instance, with couples or something. You're like, wow, what a, talk. People, please talk.
Yeah, exactly. Communicate, ask questions, negotiate, say what's cool, what's your boundaries. But so many people just don't understand that. And I think it's because we're not used to talking about that side of our lives. It's always like behind closed doors. It's not, people aren't used, well, especially women aren't used to asking for what they want. And just like kind of taking what they get.
Yeah. And it can just be really hot to ask for what you want.
Yeah.
Or to tell. Like if you're playing with embracing your dominant side, to warm up from a request to a command, right?
Yeah.
And it can be really simple, like you were saying, I think in your course, like get a cup of tea.
Yeah.
It can be anything.
Yeah.
And why not? You deserve it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a simple request. Yeah. But I think that's also, comparing it to like as a professional dom, I think you know, I'm sure you've had clients where you come in, you're like, oh, you know, what are you interested in? They're like, I'll just do whatever you want. And I'm always like, I can't do anything without consent. Like, or they're like, oh, you know, just try whatever you're feeling today. I'm like, well, no, you have to like tell me.
What I'm feeling today could be needle play, so you better. And then they're like, oh, not that. I'm like, well, so start.
And that's why we have consent. It's because like, and I always say that, I'm like, I literally can't do anything unless you tell me what you want. We can just sit here and stare at each other. So I love that, you know, we have the extremes from, you know, vanilla life and even into kink where people are like, oh, just do what you want. But it's like, no, you got to tell me. So how do you think like women can tap more into this dominant side of them? Like what's some tips that people could kind of take away? Like how can I, like if I'm someone who doesn't really know the kink scene, I'm not part of it, I don't really know people in it, like what's the way that I can kind of start tapping into my dominant side?
Well, I suppose there are a few ways. One that that could work or not, depending on what sort of event you turn up to, is there are some really great studio spaces out there offering sort of kink workshops, essentially.
Yeah.
And if you turn up to a good one, then you'll probably get at least an education and a sense of whether or not you want to play with it. And by talking to people who, you know, do that, for me, it was certainly really, it's kind of strange. I feel like one way I did it at the start when I was still quite new is that if there's ever been a moment in your life where you just felt like super hot shit or like when, I don't know, did you ever win a race or did you really enjoy that dance night that you had out there where everyone was staring at you or there's going to be a moment in your life where you just felt powerful, where you were riding a wave of power. Something you did. And I often will, before I start a scene, will anchor myself in a moment, and then I will create like a visual image of what will happen in the scene a bit to sort of transfer that energy. And so if you're struggling with thinking, how do I tap into dominant energy? And you're thinking, how do I do that in an erotic way with a partner? I'm nervous. Think about a time in your life that you really just did feel bloody confident. Because there will be one. Even if you're a shy person, there will be a time, maybe you just aced a test. Something. There's going to be something that made you feel like a competent, powerful agent in the world. It can be small, completely vanilla. It can be, for me, it's often sport related or, you know, whatever it is. And then think about that energy and just start to think about it. How would I transfer that to another person? So that's been one thing that I've used because the jump to sort of being a more dominant in your sexual life or playing with a partner, it can seem really
far.
Yeah, like how?
Yeah. I like that. Like take a moment because we've all got that. We've all got that moment. Use that moment.
Yeah, and then just make sure if you really want to explore this, make sure, you know, do it with someone with some empathy who's not expecting you to be like, you know, perfect. Like I've fallen over in sessions when
I always say like it is funny.
It is funny.
The amount of laughter that comes in my sessions is incredible. Like you piss yourself laughing. Like you like I always say like plugs drop out when they're not meant to. It's funny. Like I'm not going to have a straight face the whole time.
I've said get up and I'm like, oh, you're still tied down. Or literally like, I'm struggling to get something on and down I go. And like the sort of BDSM or even just power exchange in general can involve a bit of equipment and technical skill and stuff goes wrong. So you just play with someone who's not entitled. That Mistress Demelza, as doesn't like entitlement, and also just ready to have fun because any time that I've made a mistake or someone's, you know, something just hasn't gone right, you just have to laugh and let it go. But that moment, there will be a moment in your life or multiple ones or even just one. I guarantee you, no matter where you've been, there's been one moment where you were killing it and you knew it. And that's the energy. It's not sexual in itself. It is just power.
Love that. That's a great note to end on today. So if people want to find you, pimp yourself out.
I'm on Instagram, Demelza Thorn. I am also on Twitter, Demelza Thorn. And if you can't find me, you're lost. all good.
Thank you so much. You are a dom to be reckoned with, that's for sure, and lots of words of wisdom today. So thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you so much.
And for everyone at home, as always, stay kinky.